How's it going? Welcome back to Lilywhite Lane. After yesterday's shower of pygmy hippo shit from Spurs, Antonio Conte came out with a very controversial, what's been labelled as controversial by the media press conference, calling out the Tottenham board, calling out the Tottenham players. And do you know what? Despite my thoughts on Antonio Conte, and despite my thoughts recently about some of the decisions he's been making and how it's the best option in the sad situation we're in with these owners to sack him, the man's going to leave the club as a legend if he gets sacked, because he's the first guy, the first manager to really stand up to this ownership, the first manager to stand up to these owners, the first manager to actually criticise and talk about what's going on, not what Jose Mourinho did, hint at things. Antonio Conte has come out and quite literally said 20 years these owners have been there and we won nothing. Why? He ain't beating around the bush, Antonio Conte, and do you know what? Fair play to him. I genuinely don't understand how Spurs fans can be annoyed with what he said. I understand Spurs fans being annoyed about him coming out to the media and saying it, but if you're a Tottenham fan and you're annoyed by the comments he made, I think that's more the truth hurting, if I'm being honest. I think that's more the truth hurting you inside, like it does all Spurs fans, but it needed to be said. Whilst Antonio Conte also takes some of the blame for the recent woes from Spurs and the recent bad performances because of some of his substitutions and because of some of his decisions, he is spot on about the bigger picture. He is spot on about the ownership being the biggest problem, and he's spot on about the players not caring and being selfish. He is only coming out and saying what fans would have been saying yesterday in the pubs, what fans say when they're walking down Seven Sisters Road after every home game, what fans would have been saying leaving St Mary's yesterday. Yet he gets all the criticism and gets talked about in the media like he's some sort of maniac. We know that Antonio Conte in a way is insane. We know that. But you can't label him insane yesterday for coming out and speaking the truth. Like I say, I understand Spurs fans being annoyed about Antonio Conte saying this to the media, but if you're a Spurs fan and you're specifically annoyed by the comments he's made and exactly what he said, I think the truth's just hurting you, if I'm being honest. Because there is nothing Antonio Conte said yesterday that is wrong. He called out the board. He said that 20 years these owners have been here and Spurs won nothing. Why? Yes, Antonio Conte is partly to blame for the recent woes from Spurs with some of his substitutions and decision making, but we all know the bigger picture is Levy and Enoch, and he's the first manager who's come out and called it out. Fair play to him. How can people debate that? How can you say he's wrong there? He's stating the obvious. 20 years we've won nothing. Look at the history beforehand. People take the piss out of us for being a small club. We were a big club because we've got a big following from the success we had before these owners came in. Turned us into a banter club. We've got the big stage and, like Danny Rose said the other week, it's great having a fantastic house, but if you don't have the right furniture to put in, it's not so great. It's not so great. And Antonio Conte spoke nothing but the truth yesterday. Tell me what he has said wrong. Please, someone tell me. If you don't like the comments Antonio Conte has made, tell me why. Please, genuinely. I'm confused on how Spurs fans can be annoyed by this. I understand Spurs fans being annoyed about the manager coming out and saying this to the media. And you question whether he said this to the players or not. I understand that. I understand fans being annoyed about the meltdown. But you can't be annoyed about exactly what he said, about the comments he made, because they're right and they're correct and they're spot on. Exactly what he said about the managers, exactly what he said about the situation he's in and how this is the first time he's experienced this. How has Jose Mourinho and Antonio Conte both come to this club and not succeeded? Genuinely, they've had success everywhere else they've been, and they've not succeeded at Spurs. We know that the owners are the bigger problem. We know that the owners are the bigger problem. For me, Antonio Conte, what he said yesterday is spot on. Having said that, I still believe the best option for Spurs right now is to sack Antonio Conte. And let me explain. I completely agree with what he said yesterday. And I don't want Spurs to sack Antonio Conte because of how bad Antonio Conte's been. I want Spurs to sack Antonio Conte because it's the best option in the situation we're in. If we don't sack him, he's leaving at the end of the season anyway. As much as he's correct yesterday, he's lost a dressing room. And there is no point, I don't care who the manager is, there is no point keeping a manager who's leaving in 3 months' time anyway, when we're out of every competition and unable to compete for anything apart from the top 4, which he said yesterday was pointless. So for me, the best option is to still sack Antonio Conte. But by saying that's the best option, I'm not blaming Antonio Conte for his downfall. He has part to play in it with some of his substitutions recently, some of his decisions. But the main problem is Levy. Don't appoint Antonio Conte if you don't have a proper plan for him. Don't appoint Jose if you don't have a proper plan for him. You know, whilst Antonio Conte, Jose Mourinho, these sort of managers over the years have their own little part to play in why Spurs haven't been so successful with decision making. The biggest problem, 80% of the problem in my opinion, is Daniel Levy and ENIC. And yesterday, for the first time, a manager, Tottenham's manager, came out and criticised them. Tottenham's manager came out and called them out. Tottenham's manager came out and didn't beat around the bush like past ones have and stated the obvious. You know, and I respect Antonio Conte for that. There's a lot that I haven't respected Antonio Conte for in his time at Spurs. I think, you know, we played some great football at the end of last season, but I've said a lot with Conte that some of his decision making this season hasn't been good enough. I stand by that. A lot of his downfall also isn't down to him, it's down to Daniel Levy and ENIC, and I still believe the best option is to sack him for the situation we're in. Because he's leaving in 3 months anyway, and there is 0 point in keeping him. But you cannot criticise, for me, the comments he made yesterday, and you cannot deny that they're not true. That's why I think some Spurs fans are annoyed about the comments. You know, I understand Spurs fans being annoyed about him coming out and saying this to the media, because you question whether he said it to the players, as I say, but if you're a Spurs fan and you're annoyed about Antonio Conte coming out and making these comments, which you know are true, I think you need to look at yourself in the mirror. Look, thank you for watching this video. I've given my opinion. Do I think Antonio Conte was spot on yesterday in what he said? Yes. Do I think the best option is still to sack him? Yes. 3 months left. As sad as this is, it could have been so much better. And the reason it hasn't been so much better was because he didn't get the proper backing and the proper players he needed to in the summer from ENIC and Levy. But the situation we're in, with him leaving in 3 months anyway, and completely losing the dressing room, there's 0 point in keeping him now. But his sacking, when it inevitably comes out, is not all down to his downfall. Most of it is down to the pathetic display that ENIC and Levy have put on, the circus they've put on by appointing Antonio Conte and not giving him the proper tools to do the job. Look, those are my thoughts and opinions. I thought Conte was spot on yesterday in what he said, and if he does go on to get sacked now, which looks very, very likely, because he's basically handed in his resignation letter, I'll clap him off. I will genuinely clap him off. Thank you for watching this video. Take care of yourselves. All the best. God bless. Have a smashing rest of your weekend. And as always, come on you Spurs. But most importantly, ENIC and Levy out.